Okay, let's slowly get started as people join. So if my connection's not great, let me know. I'll have to move somewhere in the house closer to the thing. But today's daf is daf Chaf Daled 24 in the Sechet Bava Kamma. We are up to the Mishnah at the bottom of Chaf Gimel Ambet. Excuse me. Says the Mishnah. Remember that for the specific chiyuv of Karen, of damage by a shar, the Torah differentiates between a tam and a muad. Whether the animal is novice at this, it's just first few times, or whether it is frequently one that causes damage. And you're chayav chatzi nezek from the animal if it's a tam, and nezek shalem from aliyah, meaning from your property, if it's a muad. Says the Mishnah, Ezehu tam ve'ezehu muad. How do you define an animal that's a tam and an animal that's a muad? Says the Mishnah, muad kol she'ida bo shlosha yamim. If an animal has done something 3 days in a row, then it is considered to be ragil, to be used to doing that. It changes its behavior. And although a normal shor might not gore a person, this animal certainly is suspected of that, and it becomes a shar muad. The tam, here we just started the Mishnah, tam mishiyachzir bo shlosha yamim. You can revert. This is a novelty. We haven't said this before. You can revert to the stage of tam by not doing it for 3 days. So it's essentially behavioral, and you see what the animal does. If it doesn't do anything, attack anyone for 3 days, it becomes a tam. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says it doesn't relate to 3 days. It relates to 3 episodes, right? And those are mu'ad shehidu bo shlosha pa'amim. So they testify 3 times that this animal hurt another animal or another person or a person, and then it becomes a muad. And a tam is kol shehit tinokot mashshim b'oveinu nogeach. Of course, we said yesterday, the problem with Rabbi Meir is that if it's not dependent on days, how do you ever become a tam again, right? How do you revert? Because time doesn't do it. So it has to do with episodes, potential episodes of damage. And the potential episodes of damage are where you have kids who are fooling around with the cow, pulling its tail, pulling on its horns, doing stupid things, and the cow doesn't attack them, then it shows that it is a calm cow, let's say. Okay, so that is the Mishnah. Excuse me. My time, Rabbi Yehuda asked the Gemara, first line of the Gemara, what's the rationale for Rabbi Yehuda that it's based on 3 days? Amar Baya, sorry. The pasuk says, Im shar nagachu, I'm adding the words in the beginning of the pasuk, mitmol shoshom, right? So if it just said the word tmol, that would imply yesterday, chad. That's 1 time. Mid tmol, the extra mem, tells you trey, tells you 2 days. Shilshom, which is 3, is tlata. And therefore, the Torah says that if it does it 3 times, and now we're quoting the pasuk, lo yishmerenu ba'alav, you don't watch it to prevent it from doing it again. That means you let it do it a 4th time. So it is the 4th one, and it's related to days. Bava says that, well, actually, I would read it the following way. Tmol, mi tmol is chad. The extra mem doesn't tell me anything extra. So tmol means yesterday. And shilshom means 2 days ago. Trey. Lo yishmerenu ha'idna chayav. If you didn't watch it, you'd be chayav now. And that would be for the 3rd time, basically. There's a huge, huge discussion here. Rashi says that, according to this opinion of Rava, you'd actually be chayav for the 3rd time that you did it. So that a shar hamuad would not be 4 times, it would actually be 3 times. Tosas points out that Rashi clearly changed his mind about this later, and no one really agrees with this. So even though Rashi does say it here, Tosas does not think that Rashi really believed this at the end of the day, and he changes his mind, as we'll see elsewhere. Tosas quotes Rashi and Bava Basra. But that's the machloket Abaye and Rav. Asking Rabbi Meir, my time, what's Rabbi Meir's reason to say that it depends not on episodes of goring, but on days? I'm sorry, the opposite. Not on days of goring, but on episodes. The Tanya, Amar Rabbi Meir, top of Daf Chaf Daled now, says Rabbi Meir, it's a kal v'chomer. Richek nigichotav chayav. If an animal scores 3 times in 3 days, right? I agree, says Rabbi Meir, based on the pasuk, that that's considered a shar hamuad. But if it did the same angry behavior in 1 day, certainly it's a shar hamuad, right? You can't have an angrier shar than this. right? If it doesn't, so Richekin Gichotav means it spaces out its gorings. You become a chayav as a muad. If it brings them closer, certainly the animal has been established as an angry animal. Not that the word angry really matters here, but a muad animal, right? And so if it could do that in 3 days, it certainly could do it in 1 day. That's the kal v'chomer of Meir. It's not based on a pasuk. It's based on a logical and a limud from a kal v'chomer. Says the Gemara, L'kol shekin. Amar lei. So they said back to Meir on the second line of Chav Daled, Zava tochiach. What about, let's take another example of a halacha in the Torah. Now, this is a very tenuous comparison, but nonetheless, we're going to do it, where you basically go from having behavior that could be one-time behavior to being a pattern of behavior. And the example that we like to use is a zava, right? So zava is a woman who has a discharge that's not menstrual. It's not nida. So if it happens one time, one day, she becomes tamei that day and then becomes tahar that evening. If it happens the second day, she's again tamei that day and tahar that evening. But if it happens 3 days in a row, the Torah considers her what's called a zava gedola, and she's tamei for 7 days, and she's to bring a karban, right? All these halachot we learned in Masechet Nida. So that's the same kind of idea, right? Where you basically have something that happens once or twice is not a pattern, but if it happens 3 times, it becomes a pattern. And the halachot of a zava, which are very interesting, are that she's only a zava if it's 3 days in a row. If she sees blood or sees a discharge 5 times in 1 day, she doesn't become a zava gedola, right? Which goes against Rabbi Meir's kal v'chomer, and that's our question. Now, interestingly, a male zav, right? A male who's a zav, it's the opposite. A male zav only becomes, well, no, that's not true, also becomes tamei if he sees 3 times in 1 day. So by a male zav, you actually don't need to have 3 days in a row. You could have 3 days in a row, but you can also become tamei as a zav, or zav gadol, I guess, in 3 times in 1 day. So ask the Gemara, we'll get to that in a second. Ask the Gemara, what about a zava is tochiach, right? Zava tochiach, second line. If she sees the blood 3 days in a row, or whatever discharge, she's tameya. But kirvariota, if she sees it together in 1 day, 3 times or 5 times or whatever in 1 day, tahora, she wouldn't be a zava gedola. She'd just be tamei for that day, but then become tahar. So Amar Lehen, so Meir says, you're right. That goes against my logic. But that's because there's a pasuk. Harehu Omer, because it says by a zav. Remember, the zav is the one who, if he sees 3 times in 1 day, becomes tamei. It says by a zav, zot tiyat tumato bizovo. This zot, the word zot is this, and only applies to him, right? This is the tuma in his zovo. Talaha katuv et azav b'riyot. Torah explicitly says that a zav depends on times of seeing, riyot, and a zava in yamim, in days, right? So there, you're right. This is Rabbi Meir. A zava goes against my principle, but it's because there's a pasuk. The pasuk explicitly says only a male zav depends on riyot, on seeing. A female zava depends on days, but usually I would make this kal v'chomer. Says Gemara, well, before you get to this sidebar of zav, my dahai vizot lemute zava miriyot. How do you know the word vizot tells you only a zav is tamei by seeing 3 times, not a zava? Ema lemute zav miyamin. Maybe it's telling you the opposite, that a zav only becomes tamei if he sees 3 times in 1 day, not if he sees 3 times in 3 days, right? Meaning, how do you know? Remember, there's one halacha by a man, one halacha by a woman. A woman becomes tamei 3 days in a row if she sees 3 days in a row. Man becomes tamei if he sees 3 times in 1 day. How do you know which one applies to the other one? So the word zot, we said, excludes a woman from the man's halacha. As the Gemara, maybe zot to tell you to exclude the man from the woman's halacha, right? Seems like it would be fair. None of this has to do fairness, by the way, right? Says the Gemara, well, it can't be that, because it says on Markra, the pasuk says that they're the same. It says v'hazav et zovo la zachar v'la nekeva, that by zav a man and a woman are the same. Makish zachar la nekeva. So now you have to compare them in one way, right? So like I said, again, each one has their own halacha. A zav 3 times in 1 day, a zava 3 days in a row, right? So each one's got their own concept of tuma, but there's another pasuk that says they're together. So how do you compare makish zachar la nekeva? Right? Manikeva biyamim, just like a nikeva becomes tamei with 3 days in a row. Avsachar biyamim. So that's how we learn that. This is where, well, again, you have one for each person. You have one comparison and one exclusion. How do you know to include the man to be like the woman and exclude the woman from being like the man? Maybe it should be the opposite. Right? But Leikish Nikeva Zachar. Why don't you do the hekesh to compare the woman to the man that she should become tamei by seeing 3 times in one day? Mazachar b'riyot after keva b'riviyot. Well, but you have to exclude someone. Hamniyad Rahmana v'zot. And ask the Gemara Mara'it. So again, how do you know? Torah says that there's halacha for men, there's halacha for women. They're different. In one case, we compare them to each other. In one case, we don't compare them. How do you know which direction to go? So ask Gemara Mara'ita. What do you see to prove to you to go one way or the other? You have it somewhere?
Yeah.
Enters the Gemara, Mistavra, it seems logical to us that koi b'ri'iyot v'ma'etru b'ri'iyot. If you're talking about a man, a zav, and who sees 3 times, and that's the halacha, that you should exclude someone else from being that halacha. Zot means this is only true by a man, not by a woman. But if you're koi b'ri'iyot v'ma'et, next word, yamim, right? Question mark. If you're talking about riyot, would you exclude someone who's sinned by days? And therefore, that's how we know the halacha of a man and a woman with zav. But it has no relevance, says Rabbi Meir, to this discussion because it's all based on psukim. Remember, psukim generally trump a kal v'chomer. So if the pasuk explicitly says something, that's what goes. The question by a shor hamuad is what's the halacha? Is it 3 days? It's certainly 3 days in a row. Everybody agrees to that. Right? But what about 3 times in one day? So says Rabbi Meir, I have a kal v'chomer. Says Rabbi Yehuda, I don't really care for your kal v'chomer, right? And so that's the machlok in the Mishnah. Is a shar a muad if it scores 3 times in one day? Let's read the Breita to try to conclude the next halacha. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Breita, a third of the way, maybe almost 10 lines down. Tanu Rabbanan, ezehu muad. What is a shar hamuad? Anyone in which they testify for 3 days in a row, this animal has hurt another animal. And tam, now remember in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said a tam is if you wait 3 days. But here we get a new opinion, a third Tana, who says an amuad is like Rabbi Yehuda, 3 days in a row. But a tam is not 3 days in a row. Tam, a tam is where you start up with the animal, you incite it, and it doesn't attack. So there you've seen that it's gone to its anger management classes, it's calmed down, it's now a very friendly shar. Divrei Rabbi Yossi. That's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Shimon is a fourth opinion. Remember, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. They just had Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon says, like Rabbi Meir, that a mu'ad is 3 times, not 3 days, right? And they only said shlosha yamim el l'chazara belvad. Shlosha yamim is if it doesn't do it for 3 days, that's where it goes back to its status of tam. Okay?
Is that different?
In our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir said nothing to do with 3 days. You do it 3 times any one day, you become a muad. If the kids are poking you and you don't attack, you become a tam again. Rabbi Shimon says it's a combination of that. 3 days, 3 times in one day is a muad. 3 days in a row without attacking is how you go back to become a tam. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ada bar Ava, halacha Rabbi Yehuda b'muad. Halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in muad in our Mishnah that it's 3 days in a row, not 3 times. Rabbi Yossi modelo, because Rabbi Yossi agrees with him. So now you add up Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, and that's the halacha. And halacha Rabbi Meir b'tam. But the halacha is like Rabbi Meir about a tam, that you become a tam not by 3 days, but by, not by 3 days, but by being poked and not attacking. So Rabbi Yossi modelo, because Rabbi Yossi agrees with him as well, meaning basically we like Rabbi Yossi, right? So we're passing like Rabbi Yossi in both regards. And to become a muad, it's like Rabbi Yehuda, and to become a tam is like Rabbi Meir. Amalei Rava Rav Nachman. So Rava said to Rav Nachman, why do you like Rabbi Yossi so much? Like Rabbi Meir b'muad, Rabbi Shimon modelo. Right? You want to add up people who agree with other people, passing like Rabbi Meir because Rabbi Shimon agreed with him, and like Rabbi Yehuda b'tam, Rabbi Shimon modelo. Amalei said to him, well, I think you missed the point. What I'm telling you is that I like Rabbi Yossi. I trust Rabbi Yossi, right? He's my authority. Anak Rabbi Yossi svirlei. Rabbi Yossi nimuko imo. We have a principle. Rabbi Yossi always has nimuko. I don't know how they translate nimuko. You don't have English. It literally means his supporters or his proofs are with him, right? So Rabbi Yossi always had really solid rationale, or there's a difference of debate, or people on his side. So Rabbi Yossi is really reliable, and therefore I pass like Rabbi Yossi, says Rav Nachman, and in one regard it supports Rabbi Meir, in one regard it supports Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, Charlie.
Koren translated as analysis.
Okay, great. His analysis. Okay.
There's a general rule that when Rabbi Yossi is disputing his Tannaitic opponents, the halakha is always like Rabbi Yossi. Why do you
Oh,
even have to get into this?
so the rule is a little bit more complicated than that, right? The rule is halakha ki Rabbi Yossi michavero velo michaverav, right? So halakha is like Rabbi Yossi when he argues with an individual, but not when he argues with multiple people. So it gets when there's many people involved that we don't always pass like Rabbi Yossi. This is a little complicated because there's four people, but they all have different opinions, right? None of them agree in essence. So you run around in circles, but Tosas discusses that a little bit. Ibayla. Well, ask the Gemara a new question, and this is a very, very fundamental question, which is going to lead us really to the end of today's daf. The question is Shlosha Yamim de Katani, right? So we're going to pass like Rabbi Yehuda. The Torah says it: 3 days for an animal to come to Shar Hamuad. Is that liyude Tura? Is that in order to establish the status of the animal? O liyude Gavra, or is it for informing the owner of the animal? Meaning, is the purpose of these 3 days to say, look, if an animal does something Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it is now have, I can say a chazakah, but it's not chazakah in the sense of like something's kosher, so it remains kosher, right? It's that it has a behavioral predilection, and you've established that. And so by Thursday now, you look at this animal differently. It's now a shar muad. Or is it that the owners who have an animal and have been told on Monday your animal did something wrong, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, they have to have a different relationship with their animal and watch it differently? Why does it make a difference which way it is? It makes a difference if the animal did it on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but the owner didn't find out till Thursday that the animal's been misbehaving for the last 3 days, right? If you say it's the animal, we don't care if the owners knew or not. The animal has demonstrated its behavior. And now on Thursday, it's a shar muad. But if it's the relationship of the owners to their animal, since they didn't find out till the end about these 3 days, they have no responsibility to watch it differently because they didn't happen on the second day with their knowledge or the third day with their knowledge. And so you would not be a shar muad yet. So that's the first question we ask. Shlosha yamim dikatani. When we say 3 days, is that liude tura? Is that to warn basically or to testify about the animal? Oh, liude gavra. Is it the owners, right? The mainaf kamina. What's the difference? The atu tlata kite sadi bechad yuma. Let's say 3 independent groups of witnesses show up on Thursday, and they report. One says, on Monday, I saw the shark attack someone else. On Tuesday, another group says, we saw the shark attack someone else. On Wednesday, this group says, again, they all say it's on Thursday. We saw this happen on Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. If you say that it's to warn about the animal, then this is good. 3 days in a row, the animal is a shar hamuad, right? And if it attacks again, you'll have to pay full damage. But gavra, then lo miyayid. Then it's not a muad. Because even though it did it 3 days in a row, Meimar Amar, the owners can say, Hashtahut kamisadibe. We're only finding out about this now. And so this animal is not a muad today, because we're just finding out about it now, and we didn't have an opportunity to maybe behave differently with it, to watch it differently, to treat it differently. And since we didn't know, it's not a muad yet at this point. Okay? So that's the question. What's the halacha? Tashma, let's try to prove it from the Braita. The following Braita says, first word, 15 lines or so from the bottom. Excuse me. Ein hashar na'asem mu'ad, says the Braita. An animal does not become a mu'ad ad she'idu b'fnei ba'alim, until you testify in front of its owners. Now, its owners have to know about it. This doesn't prove it yet. And b'fnei beitin, and in front of court. If you tell the court has a case about the shar in front of Beitin, but the owners are not present, or the opposite, in front of the owners but not in front of court, muad. Says the Braita, that's not enough to make it into a muad. You have to have both. Sounds very repetitive. Continues the Braita, very interesting case. 2 witnesses come and testify that I'm going to say Rishonah Sunday. That's not what it means. It means the first episode, okay? But they testify that on Sunday, this animal gored another animal, okay? And then 2 witnesses come and say on the second time, B'shniyah, Shnayim B'shniyah, Ushnayim B'shlishit. right? Says the Braita, Hare kan shalosh idiot. That is 3 independent testimonies. Now, why does that matter? So, for example, right, obviously a person can't testify with their relative, with their brother. Let's say brother A saw the animal attack on Sunday and brother B saw it on Monday. They can come separately and testify about each event because each event stands on its own. They're not combined, right? So you're not saying one testimony, even though the consequence of their testimony is to establish the animal as a shar hamuad. And so in some ways, their testimony is combined. Says the Braita, you don't view it that way. You view them as being separate idiot about each event. However, in one halacha, they are considered to be one large testimony, and that is for the halacha of edim zomimim. Just to remind everyone, we'll get to this in Makot soon enough. Edim zomimim are a special halacha. The Torah says that if a witness comes and says, so a group of witnesses come and say, we saw a shar attack another shar, and therefore you have to pay $100, right? And then other witnesses come and say, it's impossible for you to have seen that because you were not in New York on that day, you were in Virginia, right? Those witnesses are Edim Zomim, the first ones, the ones who lied. It's not because they lied so much, it's because they were not present, right? Meaning if it turns out that they lied, they don't have to pay. But if it turns out they weren't even there and they could not have seen that testimony, they become Edim Zomimim and they get punished, they get makot, and they also have to pay back the damage that they would have caused had you accepted their testimony. So they have to pay the $100 back to the owner of the shar. Okay. Now, interestingly, right, let's say you have 3 groups of witnesses who come and establish a shar as a mu'ad. And then on the 4th day, the shar attacks an animal and it causes $1,000 of damage, right? So a shar mu'ad has to pay $1,000. A shar tam might only have to pay $500. It then comes out that all of these witnesses were liars, right? All 3 of the first few days were Eidim Zomimim. So now it turns out that my shar was only a tam. And so they tried to cause me $500 of loss, and therefore they have to pay that back. Okay? So that's the halacha. However, what if only one group became Eidim Zomimim? Right? Just the Sunday group. So now the other 2 are still presumed to be telling the truth. But my animal's not a muad anymore because it only did it twice. It didn't do it 3 times. So they also had caused me a loss of $500. So those witnesses have to pay the $500. Says the Braita, we're going to see in a second, they don't. Because they are not, the halacha of Eidim Zomimim is that you only become Eidim Zomimim if you're Yazumu Kulam, if they all become Zomimim in the entire testimony. And here, you view the entire testimony as being all 3 groups of witnesses. So even if one group became Eidim Zomimim, they don't have to pay. They are definitely thrown out. You don't listen to their testimony, but you don't have to pay the extra money that you would have had to pay for Eidim Zomimim. So let's read that all inside. Got the halacha?
Yeah.
Okay. It says the Braita. Hare, these 3 groups, I should be quieter. Hare kan shalosh ediyot. It's 3 separate testimonies. Vehein edut achat lahazama. But it's one testimony in regards to hazama, meaning they only become Eidim Zomimim to pay if all 3 groups are found out to be Eidim Zomimim. It says the Braita, and we'll speak that out. If the first group is found to be liars, not liars, but people who were not there, Hare kan shtei ediyot. So then you have 2 other groups that are still valid. V'hu patur v'heim paturim. The owner of the shar is patur because his animal is not a muad; it's only a tam, so he's patur from the extra 500. But the witnesses are also patur because they are not considered Eidim Zomimim on the whole amount because they're only one group. Nimtzeit kat shniya zomemet. If the second group becomes Eidim Zomimim, Hare kan edut achat. So then you count one of group as being true, right? Meaning group 1 and group 2 turned out to be false. But group 3 still counts. And hu patur, the owner of the animal is patur because his animal is not a muad. Heim paturim, the Eidim are also patur because they're not zomimim. But if all 3 groups, nimtzeit kat shlishit zomemet, then kulan chayavim, right? Then all 3 groups of witnesses have to pay the extra damage that they would have called. Now, that's the Braita. It's an exciting Braita. It's very, very fun. We'll talk about it all day today. How does this prove our question? Because says the Gemara, why in the world would 3 groups be showing up together, right? Because if you have to come 3 days in a row, the Yudei Ba'alim, Then as each group came, the second group would say, we didn't even know the first people, right? We showed up, one group showed up on Monday, one group showed up on Tuesday, one group showed up on Wednesday. How could the group on Monday be considered Eidim Zomimim for something that happened on Wednesday? Right? They had no connection. So ask the Gemara, if you're talking about a case where you testify about the Shar Shopper, then you can easily say the cases where all three groups came together. So they knew about the other one's testimony, right? And therefore you can view them as being a unified whole. But if you're talking about Gavra, that they have to testify about the person, meaning it has to be separate days, then why can't the first group of witnesses, we're at the second line of Daf Chaf Dal Amud Bet, say, how do we know that 3 days later this other group of witnesses are going to come? So we can't be Eidim Zomimim. We testified about our day. We didn't testify about the status of the shar because we have no way of knowing what was going to happen. Amr Ravashi, it's a good question. Amrita l'shmaita kameder of kahana. Amr Alei said to me, "What? You really think that's such a good question? Does it work out so well if they're testifying about the animal and they all come on one day? Why can't the last group say, well, we still went third, right? We didn't all talk at once. It's not like we knew what everyone else was going to say. How would we know that everyone else sitting on the benches of the court is going to testify about the same animal as us? Right? We showed up to court. There's 20 people sitting there. How should we know that those guys also saw the same runaway shark as us? Right? It says, well, that's not such a big question. Sorry, Anan, we'll just finish what they'd say. Anan the Chiyuv Gavra Palgan is Kinatina. We really just wanted to make him chayav half nezek, not full nezek. Well, that's not such a big question. This is how Rashi reads it. The Kamaramzi and Ramuzi, because look, if you're sitting in the courtroom together, they might be talking to each other, right? You always chat with the guy on the bench next to you, presumably. So they might be chatting with each other, and we saw them doing that. So we can say to them, we know that you know each other, right? So it's not really a proof. Rav Ashi says, well, it must be Kishabar Ritzufim. It's when they come one after the other. Either they come together or it's very suspicious, right? When you get, like when you get those phone calls over and over, it's the same script everyone's reading. There's clearly something going on, right? And so that's how we know that they know each other. Or Ravina says, you know what the case might be? The makirim bal hashar v'makrim et hashar. These people come in and they say, look, on Monday, we saw one of the animals in the flock of Rosa go and attack another animal, but we don't know which animal. We can't testify that it was the animal with the red spots, right? We couldn't positively identify the animal. In which case, right, you don't have to pay anything. Rosa shouldn't have to pay anything because remember, for a tam, you pay from the animal. And if you can't identify the animal, you don't have to pay. It's not so simple, but let's leave it at that. Right. So therefore, I'm testifying only Rosa has a wild animal that she's got to control. Then Tuesday, another group comes and says the same thing. Wednesday, another group comes and says, we found out which animal it was. And then the other groups come back and say, oh, yeah, it was that same one. Right. So at the time that they came, there's no way for them to say we wanted to be Mechai for only half nezek because there is no half nezek. Clearly, all we're coming is to say she's a bad owner and she's not watching her animals. And that's the Yude Gavra. Right. That means warning the owner. So no animals for you, Rosa. Okay. So says Ravina, that's the case. Makirin bal hashar. The witnesses recognize the owner of the animal. They makirin et hashar, but they cannot testify about the animal itself. Right? So what are they saying? They're saying, Tura nagchana itlach bibekarcha. You've got a wild animal in your bakar, in your flock. You should watch all of them. And therefore you have a responsibility, and that establishes responsibility on day one. They say the same thing on day two. And then by day three, you could say they're all one group coming together to make it a mu'at. Okay. So we don't resolve that question, but it's an interesting and important question.
I have a question.
Yes.
The person who's most likely to see his or her ox goring is the owner of the ox.
I mean, potentially, but you're not with your animals all day long necessarily.
So are the person's servants kosher witnesses?
No, but what do you mean by witnesses? You're responsible. I mean, someone else, but first of all, remember, an ox gored another ox. So the owner of that ox might be the one who claims
right.
that they saw it.
the ox that is most likely to get gored is one of your own.
You're asking, can I testify that someone else damaged me? I can't. No, that's not, you're no gay
Yeah,
with Davar, right?
so there it's going to be much harder, according to this, to establish an ox as a gorer, as a muad.
Correct. That 100%. I mean, we're going to see that, right? This is not a straightforward thing. You have to do it in front of a court. You have to have people who saw it. Correct. It's not so simple.
Okay.
You can't testify for yourself. You can't go up and say
Yeah,
someone hurt me. They have to pay me $1,000.
It doesn't have
Yeah.
to feed the purpose. It's not
Right.
about testifying. It's about the ox. So, like, if you really care about the ox, then you won't matter.
I don't think it's that simple. Ibaylo. Ask the Gemara now a big question. What? And we had this yesterday. Hamishasea kelbo shel chavero b'chavero. Mao. If a person encourages, 6 is how we would translate mishasea, a dog that belongs to someone else to attack somebody else, right? Let's say you're Shimon, and Reuven's dog is standing there, and you encourage Reuven's dog to attack Levi. Okay, so you are the perpetrator, but it's not your dog. So mahu, are you chayiv? Right? Says the Gemara. Well, no. Mishasea vade patur. The one who caused all the troubles for sure patur, because as we said yesterday, it's a grama. Right? You're probably not a nice person. Remember, there's many things you're patur midinei adam, chayav midinei shamayim, but you indirectly caused this damage. You didn't hurt someone, you just caused a dog to hurt them. But Bal Kelev might. What about the owner of the dog? Mi amrina, do you say, Matzi Amalei, the owner of the dog could say, Anna Mayavidite, like, right? What did I do? My dog is a nice dog. It's not my fault that Shimon incited my dog. O Dilma Amrina, you should say to him, look, everyone knows that dogs are liable to get angry and start attacking. Kivan diyadit b'kalbecha, since you knew about your kalev, that if a person goes and angers it, it will attack. You shouldn't have it open where people can do that. So it's true that it took another action to get your dog angry. But if you know that people can make your dog angry, you have a responsibility to watch it. So that's the question. Is the owner of the dog responsible for an action that its dog did after someone else riled up the dog? Amar Reb Zera, Tashma. Well, let me prove it from our Mishnah. Because remember, the last case in our Mishnah was, how do you get a shar that's a mu'ad to become a tam? What happens is you have to have a case where the kids are poking it with the sticks and pulling on its tail, and it doesn't attack them, right? Which is just like getting a dog angry, right? So says the Gemara, let's quote the Mishnah, tam, how does an animal become a tam? The kids are poking it, the eno nogach, and it doesn't gore. The implication is that if it did gore, you'd be chayav, right? Han-nogeya, chayav. If the kids pull the tail, the animal runs and attacks them, you'd be chayav. Why isn't that just like the dog, where you angered the dog? Amar Abaye, no, it doesn't say that you're chayav. Mikatani nagach chayav. Maybe Dilma han-nagach lo havi tam ubahi negicha lo mechayav. Maybe what it's saying is that, in fact, if the kids come and pull its tail and therefore it goes and attacks, the owner of the shark can say, I'm not responsible for that. These stupid kids, got my animal angry, and I don't have to pay for that kind of behavior. But it doesn't prove that it's a tam. Meaning, remember, tam and muad is about sort of, quote unquote, behavior of the cow. The cow's angry cow. So it reacts to this negative stimuli, so it's still an angry cow. It's still a muad. It doesn't become a tam, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily chayav for what it does. It could be just like with the dog. There's a possibility that you'd be putter, because the only reason your dog attacked, or your cow attacked in this case, is because someone incited it. So we haven't been able to prove that halacha.
Interesting.
Tashma. Well, let's prove it from the bright that we had yesterday, where a person was shisabo kelev, shisabo nachash. Remember we said this yesterday. A person incited a dog or a cow or a snake to attack another person. You're patur. Right, the mishaseya. Now, my love, patur mishaseya, the inciter is patur, but chayev bal hakelev or bal nachash. The owner of the kelev or the owner of the snake would be chayev. So this implies that you're patur for doing that act, but the owner would be chayev. So that would imply the owner of the dog is chayev. Because Gemara doesn't, as we said yesterday, it doesn't prove that at all. Ema, maybe patur af mishaseya. Maybe we're saying for sure the owner of the dog is patur. He didn't do anything. But also the person who made trouble is patur because it's indirect, because it's a grama. Amar Rava. Okay, well, says Rava, I think I know how to paskin here. Im tim silomer, if you say, Hamishaseya kelbo shel chavero b'chavero chayav. right? That a person who incites a dog of his friend, I guess friend is a loose term here, to attack another friend, the owner of the dog is chayav, right? Remember, the person who incited the attack is never chayav, but the owner of the dog would be chayav, okay? Because we paskin that if you have a dog, you have to know that there are idiots in the world who are going to stick their fingers in your dog's mouth, right? And so you have to behave and appropriately act accordingly. However, if a person incites a dog and it attacks that person, shiso hu ba'atzmo, then you would be patur. If the idiot who's angering your dog is the one who gets attacked, then you're not chayav, because basically he brought it on himself. My taima, kol hamishaneh uba acher v'shinabo patur. Wherever a person does something strange, meaning they act in an inappropriate way, mishaneh means changed. So this guy is sticking the stick in the dog's eyes, right? So then something else happens and comes and attacks it, you're patur. Because once you started the ball rolling, basically, and caused this action to happen that wouldn't have normally happened because you incited it, then anything that happens to you, the owner of the dog is patur. And the same is true by any kind of situation. And how do we know that? Amalei of Papa the Rava, Itmar Mishmeid Reish Lakish Kavatech. Reish Lakish said something, which is how I know this halacha that you said is correct. Amar Reish Lakish said a much more, I would say, common case than the dog, where you had Shtei Parot Bershut Harabim. You had two cows walking down the street. Sounds like a joke, right? Two cows are walking down the street, and Achat Revutza, one of them plops down. Revutza means that it crouches down, right? It settles down. And the other one, of course, is very annoyed because this cow's in its way, right? One of them is trying to get, it's like when the car in front of you stops, right? You start honking like crazy. So this is called road rage, cow rage, I guess, right? So one of them is trying to go. The one that's walking, the traveling cow, walks by the one that's crouching and gives it a nice kick. Like, what are you doing at the side of the road, right? Says Reish Lakish, Pitura, Pitura. You would be patur. Why? And we're going to see in a second, that's why you're patur. Because since the cow did something inappropriate by stopping in the middle of the street and crouching down, that if another cow comes along and kicks it, it's its own fault. It's like me angering the dog. But if the other way happened, if the revutza b'mahalechet, you'd be chayav, right? If the animal that crouched down kicked the one that's walking by it because he's angry that you're passing him on the left, right? Then you would be chayav for that damage. So this is a proof to what I just said, that anytime that an animal acts or a person acts inappropriately and then causes damage, you're chayav for that damage. You're patur for that damage. So the cow that crouched down and was damaged, you don't have to pay for that damage. Amalei, now Reish Lakish, Rava said back to him, I don't need Reish Lakish because I don't really agree with you. I would have said that you're chayav. I disagree with Reish Lakish. I think if you have two cows, right, one is crouched, one stopped dead in the street, and the other one walks up to it and gives it a nice kick as it walks by, you'd be chayav for kicking that cow. Because sure, you can, I'll read it inside. You'd be chayav. Damrina Lay could say to him, right, look, my animal stopped in the middle of the street, so you can step all over my animal, right? If you're walking down the road and there's an obstacle that shouldn't be there, you can just step right over it. And if you hurt my animal by stepping on it, then sure, you're patur because you're allowed to walk down the road. But I didn't say that you can kick my animal, right? You don't have permission to go out of your way to cause just to be angry. That's again like road rage, essentially, right? So basically, says Rava, I would say that only if it's a normal behavior are you patur. But if you're just angry and you go and you kick it and it's not part of your normal walking, then you wouldn't necessarily be patur. And so that's a machloket there in that case. But everyone seems to agree that if you anger a dog and it comes and attacks you, the owner of the dog is for sure patur because you are a fool for doing what you did, or as we say, call him mishaneh, and therefore the owner is patur. I think we'll stop there, even though it's.
I'm reminded of the case about 6 years ago where the woman jumped in the jaguar enclosure at the zoo in Arizona and got attacked by the jaguar.
Right. That was not a smart person.
Not a smart person. Normally zoos will euthanize an animal that attacks a human, and the zoo did not do that because they felt that it was not the jaguar's. So the jaguar was rogue patur, I guess.
Right. So is it maybe like a tom?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Shavua Tov. We'll pick up from the Mishnah tomorrow. God willing, I'll be back next Motzei Shabbat.
All right. Yasher
Thank you,
Koach.
everyone. Bye.
How do you answer the, we hung up? I slammed down you.